My talk this morning is going to be follow on my talk that I had last year that spoke about the trends in facilities management. What I'm doing this year is focusing specifically on COVID-19 and seeing what that impact is on the workplace then as well, and how COVID-19, this pandemic, has transformed our lives as well. And saying then, with the fact that remote working has become the way of life, why should we go back to the workplace? By way of introduction, my name is Richard Flame. I've recently been appointed as the Managing Director for a Broad Property company, Broad Property Group's interest in Botswana. And before that, I was the Facility Management Director for Broad Property Group in terms of the entire portfolio. So I've only recently taken over as the Managing Director of Broad Botswana. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity as well. So what am I talking to you about this morning? Very briefly. Firstly, just the idea of why it's important as humans we need work and why we need to return to the workplace. Also talking briefly about COVID-19 compliance in the workspace, and saying what are the elements and how has compliance moved to resilience and understanding issues of resilience leadership as well. And very briefly saying what is the new normal then? With COVID having come to every shores of this continent, of this world, what is the new normal? And also briefly talking about what the future of work is. And I mean, for many of us, 2020 has really brought about a lot of changes and surprises as well. So much so in terms of working from home. And I mean, everybody's become experts in operating Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and all the applications that we need to do the work. And we've quickly had to find a balance between the professional space as well as the space of saying you're at home. And it is a balance that is not easily to maintain between having to be professional and also having to work then from home. But what we've seen with restrictions being lowered in many parts of the world, also in South Africa where I live, is that the workforce is systematically going back to the workspace. And just as we were getting comfortable with working from home, we need to get back to the workspace. But why return to the workspace? It turns out that we are all social beings. It turns out that it's important for us as human beings to be together because it gives us a sense of purpose. It is the urgency and it is the agency of work that makes us to feel productive. Imagine coming from a good day at work and understanding the joy that comes from achieving as well. Also important, we need to maintain a standard of living. We need to make sure that the bank manager doesn't knock on our doors. So also important from that point of view, that work is important for us. Very important also is that we are creative beings, and that creative nature in us forces us to want to go to work. And so then why the need specifically for the workplace? Productivity. We've seen that it's true that we've been very productive working away from the office and working remotely. In instances, people have said that people have worked as productive as they ever could have been in situations like this. But what we've also seen is that productivity is much more when we are actually in a team. And because of the nature of us being social beings, it's important that we need the togetherness and we need the essentials of working together. Another thing that's come from COVID-19 is also the fact that we have categorized a part of work that we call essential workers. So irrespective of COVID-19, these people needed to be at work. Here we're talking about our petrol attendants, people working in supermarkets, police, traffic officers, people that needed to be in the workplace, irrespective. People make sure that the wheels of society keeps on working. Another important thing is what psychologists and sociologists call social constructivism. Now, social constructivism is based on two premises. Firstly, to say that we as human beings, our development is based on us being social. And secondly, that our knowledge as people is constructed through human interactions. And so what that means for us normal human beings is to say that if I bring in an idea and you bring in an idea, we can then create a third idea. And for that reason, the workplace is also important. Also from a psychological point of view, in terms of teamwork and collaboration as well. But what has returning to the office meant in terms of occupational health and safety, as well as compliance to COVID-19? When we went back to the office, what we saw immediately was that buildings were prepared with necessary signage. Signage were installed, screens were installed for reception areas, offices were deep cleaned where necessary, hand sanitizers and wipes were supplied to all staff, social distancing were instituted as well. Compliance officers needed to be appointed, trained, and they needed to make sure that work happens. Meeting rooms needed to be marked to allow for social distancing and well. All these things that we saw when we returned to the office were really based on three things. The premise of firstly making sure that prevention is in place. And the way that companies made sure that the prevention is in place is to say that risk and health assessments need to be done. Risk and health assessments need to be done to make sure that we understand what the risk of COVID is on the workplace. Second thing that we needed to do was also to do a condition assessment and making sure that surely the assets that we had were fit for service, but very much so fit for purpose. Second premise for the return of this office and all the things that I just spoken about was early detection. Making sure that staff and visitors complete questionnaires and are screened to make sure that any sign of COVID is picked up in time. Third premise, constant surveillance. So that in as much as prevention is done through an assessment, in as much as we make sure that early detection is done, we also make sure that when risks are picked up in the company, that we can, for instance, take people to an isolation room, take them to hospital, and make sure that constant surveillance is done. Necessary equipment is kept and hygiene is always maintained. So that's the picture that we saw when we went to work. But McKinsey and company says very importantly, coronavirus is not only a health crisis of immense proportion, it's also an immense restructuring of global economic order. Second thing that Arab says is COVID-19 has accelerated pre-existing trends in commercial property sector, from health and safety and well-being to activity-based working. So although COVID-19 has got a serious impact on occupational health and safety, it also has got effects in terms of financials and activity-based working. It takes us then to the new normal. What is this new normal that people are purporting all the time to be? The first thing that we've seen, the first change that we've seen, evolution in the workspace, is where COVID-19 has not just been an occupational health and safety thing, but it's also become an issue of making sure that companies are resilient to make sure that whenever we face a situation, we can bounce back quickly. What Deloitte says is that in terms of resilience, it needs to be based on trust. And trust is based on four things: making sure that the physical environment in which people work is safe and people trust that that is safe. Also making sure that digitally people have the information that they want, it's right, and people trust that information is kept safe. Financially, making all sure financial concerns are being served and it makes people feel emotionally safe. Important then that in this time of COVID-19, from a resilience point of view, the important things that we need to ask as leaders to say, when we communicate to people, our staff, our clients, our stakeholders, Is the communication clear and transparent? When we deliver service, is a service delivered competently? And when we monitor progress with respect to the service, is it done in a big way? So we've seen that this change around how we perceive COVID from just being an issue around occupational health and safety, which is important, also to look at things around resilience. One of the things that we saw around the new normal. One of the trends that we saw around 2017, and I gave a lot of talks around these trends, is that outsourcing was a big issue that we needed to speak about. Integrated services we needed to speak about. Multi-generational setups of workspaces, issues around collaboration, managed workspaces, co-working, wellness, as well as making sure that the data that we have in organization is used for critical decision making as well. We also saw that the rise of robots and how we apply that in workspace was important. That was 2017, 2018. 2018, 2019, we saw similar trends, more or less, speaking about importance of outsourcing, making sure that the services within facilities management that we have, may it be occupational health and safety, may it be hard services, soft services, quality related, that the best areas of impact is where we integrated those services. Also importantly about the workplace, making sure that the workplace is smart. And many of these issues were important over those periods in time as well. What we've seen though, with the new normal, is that besides those issues that we've been worrying about for this last 3-4 years, the new normal speaks about specific things as a result of the impact of COVID. The one talks about digital transformation. I've already said what the impact of the way of communication through either Zoom has been, through Microsoft Teams, or whatever application that you're using. Also the adoption of remote working. Nowadays we talk of the of remote working as a way of working. Also about traveling times, to say that, do we stagger the work? The people coming to the workspace in a staggered approach, and all of these things have become part of the new normal as well. New ideas around the purposes of workspace, a rethink of the workspace, to say, how do we bring things like collaboration into the workspace in a better way? How do we bring things like people just chilling in a workspace in a particular way? How do we coordinate efforts in the workspace in a specific way as well? So the new normal has brought us into these kind of things, also for us to say, how do we bring those hygiene considerations into consideration as well? And so the future of work then, a few years ago, spoke about things like the workforce, the workplace, and technologies, and how we bring those elements in. Very important. Also to say, in a workforce, how do we consider, for instance, things around the millennials, things around bringing women to the workforce, and making sure that future skills talk to the way that we do the work. Very important. From a workplace point of view, the kind of structures that we needed to have, the future of work centers were also important. From a technology point of view, it was important that we say, with the onset of robots, how do we bring all that and bring that into the humans and into the area of work? What is the future of work looking like now? Future of work says, besides all those things that's important, it's important, number one, that we're not just talking about comfort, but we're talking about the connection of people, and also making sure that when people come into the workspace, the contribution that they give is brilliant. Designing work for well-being and living and performing at the best. How do we make sure that people who work now from at least 50% at home have all the amenities at home that they would have at work? For many of us, the work is a place where you can get internet connectivity all the time. It's a place for many of us where you can actually have a workstation. How do we make sure then, if people are working between home as well as work, that those things are also taken into consideration? Post-generational workforce. I've just showed in my previous slide how important it was for us to consider issues around millennials. Simon Sinek, who I've spoken about in many of my presentations, past presentations, talks about how we bring the millennials into the workspace. What we've seen with COVID-19 is not just that it affects people 35 and older, but the millennials are affected by it as well. So we can't just talk about them, but we have to have a perennial approach as well. And so the future of work is then changed for us in dimensions that we haven't thought about. Also about reskilling. How do we bring in then the skills also to make sure that this resilience that we're talking about in terms of uncertain times, that we can maintain that as well. And so we see that the future of work has completely changed in this last few months as well. Finally, and this is always a slide that I'd like to conclude with. Winston Churchill said, "We shape buildings and thereafter they shape us." It's an important time though around COVID-19, because the other thing that COVID has shown for me personally is that it's been a time of governments having made decisions very quickly. It's the quickest I've seen governments make decisions. It's the quickest that I've seen governments make emergency funding available. It's the quickest I've seen a lot of things happen in the workspace as well. It's also been a time where we had to think about how we make sure that when people come into the workspace, that we always make sure that they are safe even on their way to the work. How people transport them into the workspace has also become important. And so as the future of work is changed, as the future of work is transformed, it's an important for us, and I think this is an important time for us to take this opportunity to say, let the buildings that we develop for our workforce be in such a way that it meets the requirements, not just from a safety point of view, but also from issues from a point of things like resilience, and making sure that the workforce is as comfortable to work either are they at home or are they in the office as well. I will pause here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that insightful presentation.